Namaste. Getting a good score in your IELTS test need not be difficult as long as you prepare well and you practice regularly. In this video, I'm going to show you the best strategies to help you improve your listening, writing, reading and speaking. Let's start with listening. First thing to help you prepare with listening is developing your active listening skills. This is combined with how you speak with people. When you're talking to someone, it's very, very important that you learn to paraphrase what that person is saying. Not only does that show that you are listening to them, but it shows that you can understand things in many different ways. It's also very important when you're talking with people to pay close attention. And when you do pay attention, this will also mean you don't interrupt. A lot of times people struggle to communicate and improve their communication is because they are too busy thinking about what they want to say and they're not focusing on what the other person is saying. The more you do this in your regular interactions with people, the easier you will develop the skill of listening. Next is to take regular practice tests. And this doesn't just mean going onto the same websites and listening to those. This means listening to a variety of different texts that are talking to you. You can find many different podcasts that will teach you how to listen in different accents and in different speeds as well. I found people often say they can't understand my accent, and which surprised me because I thought I speak English perfectly. But really, nobody speaks English perfectly. We all speak English in our own ways. And the more you are familiar with different accents, the easier it is to understand them. When I first lived in India, in my first few months, I found it very, very difficult to understand people a lot of the time. But the more I listen and the more I pay attention to what people are saying to me, the easier I find it to understand people. Next we have identify the key words. When you get the test in the IELTS exam, you'll be given the questions before you're played the recording. If you look at the questions beforehand, you give yourself a massive advantage because you have a good idea of what the speaker is going to be talking about on the recording. So identify the keywords by underlining them and thinking about the words that might go along with the question. Next, make use of your time. This is similar to my previous point. You're given the questions before the recording is played. Start scribbling down notes for each question and keep thinking about what kind of things are going to come up based on the questions that come before it. Next, take practice note-taking techniques. This can be done in any scenario. You can do this when you're listening to somebody give a speech at work. It can be done when you're watching a YouTube video that is educational. You can be learning whilst also learning how to learn better. So write down the key words and the key ideas that are in these videos or these speeches that you listen to, and it will help you immensely when it comes to the listening test. And finally, focus on the main ideas and details. The listening test isn't there to confuse you. It's there to show you pieces of information and to test how well you've understood the words in that piece of information. So don't try to think about any subtleties or any hidden messages. Just focus on the main ideas and details because that will give you the massive bulk of the answers and the marks available. Moving on from listening now, we're going to look at reading. Reading, my top tip is to develop daily reading habits. There are a wealth of places you can read to practice your daily reading. You can look at comments on YouTube or Instagram. You can read newspapers and magazines that are online. Even when you're going around your city, just look at the different signs, the different shops, and try to really think about what the meanings of those words are. Think about what other meanings they could have as well. In English, there are many words with many different origins. Start thinking carefully about the words that have different meanings just for the same word. Next, practice different reading strategies. There are loads of different reading strategies when it comes to taking in the information of a text. You can skim a text, which means reading it very, very fast, and then just taking the gist of it. You can scan a text. That means going to a particular part of a text and trying to look for a specific word to help you get a real idea of what that whole text is about. Once you find that specific word, you can then branch out and read a lot more closely and take in the most important information. Next, pay attention to time management. Once again, you're going to find that some people read faster than others. There are times where you're going to need to skim sections of the text if you are running out of time. Saying that, try to give yourself enough time at the end of the text so that you can scan a piece of the text to really get the full picture of what the text is about so you can answer as accurately as possible. My next tip is to familiarize yourself with the different question types. There are 14 different types of question in the reading exam, so make sure you are prepared to answer each one of them. On prepareielts.com, you can find plenty of mock tests that will help you familiarize yourself with the different question types, and at the end, our AI evaluation will give you an accurate band score to tell you how well you've done. Finally, work on your vocabulary. The average English native speaker knows around 10,000 to 20,000 words, and the average intermediate foreign speaker of English knows about 3,000 words. Try to put yourself closer to the native speaker category by watching lots of TV shows in English, by reading lots of books in English, by going onto YouTube and looking at English-speaking YouTubers, and this will help build your vocabulary. By reading and by listening lots in English, you will boost your vocabulary a lot, and use a dictionary to check out words that you haven't heard before, or translate them back into your mother tongue to give yourself a better picture. But just do be wary that the translations on Google aren't always completely accurate, so make sure you're looking at the definitions of the word as well. Moving on to IELTS writing. This is one of the trickiest sections, as you have to be careful about how to express yourself whilst also thinking about your spelling, punctuation and grammar. First of all, make sure you understand the difference between academic and general. If you're taking academic, make sure you're prepared for what the academic questions are like, and if you're doing general, make sure you're prepared for what the general questions are like. Ensure you read and understand the question. There are only 2 questions in this section, so if you misread one of the questions, you'll end up giving an answer that is not appropriate, and you can miss out on a massive chunk of your score. So read the question really, really carefully and make sure you understand exactly what it's asking of you. Thirdly, this should hopefully be obvious, but please do use paragraphs. I don't know if you've ever seen someone talk without any structure and just rambling and rambling. Usually when they're in a very emotional state, they don't talk in paragraphs. But when you see someone talking very carefully, thinking about how they're going to structure their response, they are using paragraphs. Paragraphs show that you have confidence in what you're talking about because you can organize yourself from an introduction, 2 main ideas in 2 different paragraphs, and then a conclusion to show that you've fully thought through everything you're writing. Next, practice your language skills. There are many different ways you can improve your language skills. If you follow us on prepareielts.com, I'll be giving you lots of different talks about how to use different phrases and different rhetorical devices. And also just make sure you're listening to some of the best speakers and the best writers that have ever been. They can give you so much influence on how to improve your way of communication. Me personally, I like to listen to lots of comedians because I think comedians see the world in such a unique way, and they can also entertain me a lot as well. And I've certainly learned a lot about language just from being made to laugh. Finally, plan time according to task. This can be done by just practicing lots and lots. You might find early on that you have completely left way too much left to write by the end of your writing section. So the more you practice, the more comfortable you will be with how long it takes you to write an introduction, write a body paragraph, write another body paragraph, and write a conclusion, as well as planning everything that needs to go there as well. And finally, we come to the speaking section. The first tip is obvious. Practice speaking English. Wherever you get an opportunity, even when you're just on the street talking to a stranger, try speaking to them in English. If it's a time where you're not in a hurry and getting the quickest answer possible isn't most necessary, just try speaking to people in shops or at restaurants in English to practice your speaking. They'll probably appreciate it as well because they might want to practice their listening and speaking themselves. Next up, speak clearly and confidently. If you're speaking to someone who is an expert speaker or is a lot more advanced than you, feel free to ask them questions about whether you've said something in the correct way or whether you could be clearer in how you've expressed yourself. Most people are more than happy to give feedback when they're asked. Next, when it comes to talking to people, and especially in your speaking exam, avoid giving simple yes and no answers. Think about the nuances of your opinions. Think about the nuances of someone's perspective. Don't just give a simple yes when someone says, do you like cricket? Maybe go straight into why you love cricket. Say, I love cricket because. Okay? Next up, use a wide range of vocabulary. This can be improved along with your listening and your reading just by looking and listening to the best English speakers. Try to use words that are outside of your comfort zone. When you learn a new word, try to use it in about 5 different sentences. When you meet someone that is happy to speak in more advanced English, try slipping that word into conversation. Try and see if they react to it as well. You might find that they are more confident in you as a speaker if you can use a word that isn't used so commonly. Next up, develop the skill of switching topic angle. Now what this means is sometimes you'll be asked a question that even in your native language you might struggle to talk about. But if you're clever with language, you can admit that you can't talk about something, but you can rephrase the question that you've been asked ever so slightly and then talk about something that you are more confident with. This doesn't mean that if I ask you a question about cooking, you go and then start talking about driving. But if I started asking you a question about cooking and you didn't know how to cook, maybe just talk about your experience of enjoying food or talk about your experience of someone else's doing cooking. You don't have to be an expert on everything when it comes to speaking in English, but you do need to be able to communicate confidently. And finally, take advantage of mock speaking as much as you can. If you come to Meridian Overseas, we take mock speaking almost every day, and we are always encouraging people to speak for the full 3 hours that they're here purely in English. The more you practice, the more you learn. The speaking test consists of 3 parts. For part 1, you're just going to give short answers. So make sure your answers are short and concise. This means that you answer the question without rambling and without going into too much detail, but in an accurate way. And then for part 2, you need to think about how you prepare. You're given 1 minute to prepare a talk that should last for 2 minutes. Now you're talking for 2 minutes, so do make sure you go into detail. Talk about your emotions as well. And when you do that, that'll give you an opportunity to use a lot more adjectives and be a lot more descriptive in what you're saying. And then for part 3, it's very important that you stay relaxed. You'll be asked several questions where you'll be expected to give more thoughtful and more in-depth responses. Try to stay relaxed here. You're nearly at the end of the full exam. When you stay relaxed, you'll be able to give more honest answers and answers that can flow and be more coherent. And that concludes my run-through for how to best prepare for the IELTS exam. This is just a video to tell you. Obviously, the best way to prepare for the IELTS exam is to prepare with professionals that can help you. But most of the work will have to come from you. But why not help yourself by signing up for Prepare IELTS, where you can get expert advice and frequent practice.